What's going on, guys? It's your boy DISQUALIFIED, and today I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an explanation as to a little bit of a discrepancy, a little bit of a mistake that happened over at YCS Guadalajara just a couple of weeks back. There was basically a pretty big issue that occurred that resulted in 22 individual different players from being disqualified from the tournament and not being allowed to play in the second day of the YCS. Unfortunately, this was a mistake over on Konami's part, and I'm basically going to explain to you guys what happened, why it happened, and why 22 players were basically not allowed to play day 2 as a result of this. So let's get into it. So here, I have the FAQ post for YCS Guadalajara. I have a couple of these, so we're going to look through these together, and I'll basically be explaining to you as I go what the discrepancy was and what the resulting effects were of that discrepancy. So here it says, welcome to YCS Guadalajara. A total of 1,243 duelists are basically entered into this YCS. 1,243 duelists will basically result in the YCS having 11 rounds, and from the FAQ of YCS Guadalajara, we know that the number of rounds that they're going to be doing on day 1 and day 2, because there's over 1,000 duelists, is 11 rounds total, 8 rounds day 1 and 3 rounds day 2. There's also a tab here that outlines how many duelists will advance to day 2. If there are 1,025 or over, which there were, the top 128 duelists or all players with a minimum of 19 points, whichever number is larger, will advance to day 2. So the reason why there is a little bit of a discrepancy here is the fact that a 19-point cutoff for an 8-round day 1 YCS does not make sense. And the reason why it doesn't is because you get 19 points if you end day 1 with a score of 6 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw. The way scoring works at a YCS or at any Swiss tournament for Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that every win is 3 points, every draw is 1, and every loss is 0 points. Normally, at a YCS, on a day 1 of a YCS, if you get 2 losses and win out the rest of the rounds, you do make day 2. So for an 8-round day 1 YCS, a score of 19 points to make day 2 doesn't make any sense, because with a score of 18 points, you still have a score that is able to make top cut of the YCS. A 19-point cutoff, which is outlined here on this Reddit post by Galantron, a very, very well-known online judge resource. He says, for general KDE US YCS events, a 19-point cutoff coincides with 9 rounds of Swiss on day 1 and not 8. So basically, they put the cutoff score of the YCS for the day 1 of the YCS at what it would normally be should the YCS have 9 rounds of day 1, but this specific YCS had 8 rounds of day 1, which isn't completely out of the ordinary. Having an 8-round day 1 YCS with 3 rounds day 2 is very common, mostly in Europe, less so in North America, but here at YCS Guadalajara, they opted to go for 8 rounds, which is perfectly fine, but they used a 19-point cutoff, which coincides with a 9-round day 1 rather than an 8-round day 1, which for a 9-round day 1 results in you having 2 losses, 1 draw, and 6 wins. So in this situation, basically what resulted from it is that the top 128 players made it into round 2, day 2 of the YCS, I should say, but players from 129th through 150th also had an 18-point score at the end of the first day, and they all basically did not make it into day 2 of the YCS. Now, if you look at it, normally they have this, basically these 2 different levels from which you can go through. You can either get through with points or the top 128, whichever's highest. And the reason why is because they don't want to have an absurdly low number of players making it into day 2, because they want you to play out, all 11 rounds and everything like that. If you look at the number of players that had a 19-point score, which is what Konami outlined was the baseline, or 128 players, whichever's higher, is 48. The top 48 players were the only ones to have 19 points or more, so they effectively had to use the top 128 to allow this many players to make it in. Seems a little bit outrageous and doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So in this situation, this was a discrepancy. This was a mistake on Konami's part, and this is supposed to say 18 points and not 19 points. But the big problem with that is that once they release the FAQ, it is set in stone and they are no longer allowed to change it. So the question is, Was it a typo? Was it them thinking it was 19 points was the correct score when in reality it was 18? Maybe they didn't know that there was much of a difference between an 8-round day one or a 9-round day one and didn't make the calculations on their end. All of that is possible. But I think what's most, sad for the players involved in this situation is the fact that with an 18-point score, you are able to make it to day 2 of the YCS normally, and you also have a score that is able to make top cut. If we look at the top cut breakdown here, top 32, the top 32 players went all the way down to having 25 points. 3 players with 25 points made it through, and players with 25 points after 11 rounds are players that ended with 2 losses and a draw. So every single one of these players that ended with 2 losses in day 1 of the YCS, if they simply won every single round that they played in the second day of the YCS, all 3 rounds, they won all 3, they were guaranteed topping. So imagine the confusion when you arrive at the YCS with a score that is completely able to top, and you find that your name isn't on the pairings and you're not allowed to play day 2, and people that have a score that end the YCS with a score that is worse than the score you had when you were told you couldn't continue and still make top cut. It's very unfortunate for these players. So this is a little bit of a mistake on Konami's part. It was a mistake in the FAQ. Unfortunately, they weren't allowed to overturn what the FAQ said. You have to basically follow what the FAQ says. So unfortunately, whoever made this mistake, whether it was a mistake of, just simply mistyping or a mistake of not being fully aware that an 8-round day 1 YCS uses 18-point cutoff rather than 19-point cutoff, it's unfortunate that this happened, and I just hope that this will be more, strictly looked into for later YCSs. Hopefully a mistake like this doesn't occur again, because I do think it is a little unfortunate for the players involved that weren't allowed to play day 2 of the YCS, specifically because there was a mistake on Konami's part and the players themselves didn't make any mistakes and still had a very, very viable chance to top said YCS and were effectively robbed of the opportunity to even try, which I think is the most unfortunate thing out of all of this. But congratulations to those that did make it into top 32. It was still a very successful YCS, still a large number of players that attended, which I think is a really, really cool thing. I'm really glad to see that numbers at YCSs are on the rise and that they're going up and up, and that more and more people are, showing up to these sort of events. But I am a little bit disappointed in the fact that it wasn't run as optimally as it should have been. But I think every tournament organizer should take this as a learning experience. So the players involved, very, very unfortunate. I'm very sorry for them. But I do think that at the end of the day, this should be taken away as a learning experience for any Konami official involved in running tournaments. You should always be aware of what the score cutoff needs to be depending on the number of players that you have attending and the number of rounds that you intend to be running as well. But that being said, let me know. What do you guys think? Do you guys think this is entirely Konami's mistake? It's Konami's fault 100% and these players should be compensated somewhere, something like that? Or do you guys just think this is an honest mistake and hopefully they take it as a learning experience and it doesn't occur again? I just want to let you guys know basically what happened at YCS Guadalajara, why certain players weren't able to make day 2, and basically let you guys know what was what. That being said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next one. Peace!